I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Yuwut and Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be watching today's episode.
I would say it's probably the only thing that you should be working on. If there's only one thing, work on that, because it will give you the strength to leave. It will really help you figure out who you are. Often what I find is people realise once they've left that they actually fell out of love with that person many, many years ago. So using the reason of being in love with someone to stay is like an untruth.
Welcome to shtsfckedpodcast, the podcast that gets real about addiction, mental health, and everything in between. I'm Paris, and I spent 17 years battling the bottle, 10 years hooked on meth, and I also did a stint in the escorting world, which nearly cost me everything, including my life. With both lived and professional experience, including qualifications in alcohol and other drugs, I'm here to share what I've learned along the way. Every journey is unique, and this podcast brings you stories, insights, and practical tools to help you find what works for you. Now, just a disclaimer, we dive into some tough topics here, including addiction, all forms of abuse, trauma, mental illness, suicide, self-harm, and the realities of life in recovery. These discussions can be intense, so please take care while listening and just make sure you're in the right headspace too. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast. Your support actually helps us more than you know, and it's one of the best ways to keep these conversations going. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to shtsfced, and today we have, I'm going to say a very special guest speaker, but I feel like I say that every single damn time. But I've got Coach Carly. She has come back. She has been on before, and now she's back with us. So thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you. I loved it so much the first time. I just felt like I had to come back.
I'll take it. Now, I know you've been up to quite a lot since we last spoke. I mean, we last spoke far out. When was that? It wasn't even last year. I think it was the year before. Was it 2023?
I have no idea. Everything feels like yesterday and 5-10 years ago, all at the same time. So time is just some weird construct right now.
It's a blur. Yeah, no, I think it was like towards the end of 2023, because I think you were like fairly soon, like into my first couple of episods. You were either like,
yeah, it was pretty fresh. Yeah.
Look at you now,
babe.
I know. It's crazy growth, right? But I think back then we were talking about, what you were doing for work at the time. You were still working a full-time job while trying to do your coaching business. Tell us where you're at now.
Yeah, well, I just left. I'm still technically there. I'm on leave at the moment, but I left my 18-year career in corrections. So I kind of did that across London, Sydney briefly, and then here in Perth. So that has been a very wild ride, a really great ride, a really interesting ride. I've learned a shitload of stuff about people in general. And it's definitely fueling my work as a coach these days. And I've always run my business alongside that. So I've kind of done the same things alongside each other for the last 18 years. And now I'm fully stepping in 100% into my business, which is lots of fun and very cool.
So fucking exciting. Congratulations on just taking the leap and going balls to the wall with it. It's awesome.
Balls deep is where it's at, babe.
Oh my goodness.
See, I can say this stuff now. I'm not working in corrections anymore. No one's going to tell me off. Shit, maybe someone needs to.
I need a filter version of you today. All right. I better buckle in. Well, I know we wanted to talk a little bit more about what you're getting up to in your coaching space now. And I know you're focusing a lot on self-love and healthy relationships. So I thought we could actually start diving into those topics and expand on that a little bit. So I'd love to ask, how does a lack of self-love keep people stuck in unhealthy relationships? Share your pearls of wisdom, please.
Oh, well, I feel like a lack of self-love keeps you stuck in any kind of shit situation that you're in, but especially in personal relationships. So the places where people generally will see it is they really struggle to have boundaries with people. And this could be as simple as saying no to an invitation to go for coffee, right? If you feel like someone invites you to do something or ask you to do something for them, and you feel like you don't want to do it, but you can't say no. So you say yes, or you say no by making up some random bullshit excuse that's basically a lie. And you feel really, really, really guilty about it if you don't say yes. That's a classic lack of self-love. Also, people pleasing, which is just another form of not having any boundaries. So just constantly over-giving and over-delivering to other people, especially when they don't deserve it and when you're giving to your own detriment. So where you see this a lot is in really unhealthy relationships where you'll have like a very empathic, very kind, generous, loving, open-hearted kind of person generally attracts someone who's quite opposite to that, usually with quite narcissistic traits, and they just feed off that person. So we call it narcissistic supply. Whether they're a full-blown narcissist or not, loads of people, everyone really has narcissistic traits. And these people gravitate. It's like the yin to our yang, right? Like if you're an empath, if you're a very kind, giving, loving person, you'll be the yin. And then that kind of user abuser type will be attracted to you as the yang. And they just love feeding off people like that, whether it's financial, emotional, mental, spiritual abuse, sometimes physical abuse as well. And when you've got a lack of self-love, those people will erode that more and more over time. They might inflate your ego when you first get together, but they'll erode it more over time, and it keeps you stuck there. So the fact that you already have low self-worth, low self-esteem, low self-love, which may not be obvious to you. If you're someone that has a great career, a good upbringing, you've got lots of friends, you love what you do, it may not be obvious to you at all that you have these issues of low self-worth. And it becomes much more obvious when you find yourself stuck in these patterns of not being able to say no to people and letting yourself be used and abused by people, but taken advantage of. Being used as a doormat is a phrase that I hear a lot from the people that I work with. And they get really frustrated at themselves because they're like, why do I let people keep treating me like a doormat? What is it about, like, what's so wrong with me that people keep doing this to me? So yeah, it generally manifests as lack of boundaries and people-pleasing behaviors, but also letting yourself stay in those situations and having this inability to leave because you feel like you're not good enough for anything else.
Oh, gosh, that really hit home for me. I was nodding along the whole time you're talking. I was like, yep, I've experienced this. And I really did struggle with people-pleasing. I struggled with boundaries. And I often felt like an absolute doormat. But you did mention something before about how your self-love kind of tends to erode, like in a relationship, or self-worth, self-love. What are the first signs that someone's self-worth is being eroded in a relationship?
I think once the kind of early stages of a relation or an unhealthy relationship specifically have kind of, that honeymoon phase goes away, and that honeymoon phase doesn't necessarily last 9 months like the kind of old cliche says. You'll have that honeymoon phase where you've been love bombed and that person has just mirrored to you exactly what they know that you want and what you need, and you've been sucked in by that and fallen in love. Then you're in this trap of feeling like you can't leave. And so the early stages would be, what the abuser will do, or what the person who is kind of using that person will do, is start testing the boundaries. And the person who is the one with low self-worth, low self-esteem, actually they both are, right? That's the irony of it, is the person who's using the other person is just as low in terms of their self-worth and self-esteem. And that's why they're latching on to people, is to use them to feed off them. So early signs would be having those boundaries pushed, or testing whether there are any boundaries or not. Doing or saying things, it will be very subtle and insidious at first, like, oh, you're not wearing that, are you? Oh, you're not seeing that person, are you? Why are they on your friends list? Why are you friends with all these guys on your friends list on Facebook? Just making little comments that you kind of sit there and you're like, huh? And it's like there's this permanent question mark in the air going, oh, what? That's weird. And just ignoring that, like starting to ignore the red flags that are popping up, which is really easy to do when you're first falling in love with someone. But once you're in it and you start seeing these little things, these subtle things cropping up, and then questioning it, but only questioning it to yourself and then ignoring it, that's kind of one of the early signs that you're just letting things slide to keep the peace. People with a high level of, or a healthy level rather, of self-worth and self-esteem, who have strong boundaries and respect and trust and honor themselves, which is really important. Like when you have a healthy level of self-love, self-worth, self-esteem, you trust yourself, you respect yourself, you honor yourself and your boundaries and your time and all of that stuff. And anyone that kind of doesn't fall in line with that, you have no problem standing up for yourself and speaking your mind in an assertive way, not in an aggressive way or a passive aggressive way, not being an abusive person back, but just actually saying, no, what you said just wasn't cool for me, or it doesn't ring true for me. When you kind of start to succumb to the gaslighting and the manipulation and really questioning yourself and who you are and your identity and not trusting your own decisions and thoughts and judgments, then you start relying on the other person to kind of inform your reality. And that's a really dangerous space to be in. But those early signs are really about just having, I kind of almost see it like a permanent question mark over your head. Like, did that just happen? Did they just say that? Oh, maybe I shouldn't wear this. Maybe I shouldn't speak to that person. And just really starting to have those kind of thoughts.
Yeah, I, again, was nodding away like crazy. I was just like, yes, I have experienced this as well. And it does get to that point where you really start questioning yourself because you're not strong in knowing who you are and your values and your beliefs. So I guess it's really easy to lose your identity when you don't really have a firm one. So I often would just get, absolutely sideswiped by these guys, and they would say, why are you updating your profile picture on Facebook? Who are you trying to impress? And I'm like, I don't even have my tits out. Like, there's nothing like sexual about it. Like, I was just updating it. And I would just get really confused. And then I was thinking, oh, but maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Like, it was strange. It was strange. And it was like that feeling of, there being a constant question mark. Like, you just pause for a moment and think, that doesn't feel right, but I'm just going to roll with it because that's easier for now. It's that people pleasing coming in and just trying to avoid any conflict really with that. That's exactly what I was doing.
You've massively hit the nail on the head there. It's really knowing it doesn't feel right and ignoring that feeling for yourself. So that's where the lack of trust in yourself comes in, right? You're just, it doesn't feel right and you ignore it. And to keep the peace, because it's easier to do that in the moment. In the long run, it's way harder when you just put up with that stuff because you're teaching them how they can treat you by not standing up for yourself. And, the reality is that it doesn't matter what you wore. You could be going out wearing a bin bag. You could be going out completely covered up. Whatever you did would be wrong in their eyes. And so it's literally, you cannot win with a person like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. And I wish I knew a bit better then, but I guess I was on my own journey to finding myself and loving myself. So can self-love be built while you're still in an unhealthy relationship, or does it require stepping away first?
It can definitely be built while you're in the relationship. I actually did this it was about 2016 when I fully started on what I called Project Self-Worth at the time. This was my own, I basically turned myself into a project because I used to just, like my mum would always say, oh, you're not attracting another project, are you? When I got together with someone. And, I'd be offended, but she was right. I did. Every single time I just attracted someone with more broken wings. And not knowing that deep down, the problem was within me. Like, I didn't know that I had low self-worth and low self-love and low self-esteem for a really long time because all I remember was a really good, healthy, loving family that I was raised by, who my parents are still together now. They've got an awesome relationship. Like they're the epitome of a healthy relationship for me. Now they've had to do work on that too, right? And so that's all I remember was having this healthy, loving, happy family. Yeah, we went through stuff, but we've always stuck together. And I've got great friends. I had a great career. I moved from London to Australia to live my dream life. Like I had all these amazing things that I had achieved, that I'd done. And when I was in my early days of being in Australia in 2011. So in 2010, I left a really unhealthy relationship in London, and I went into depression after a few years of some really hectic shit going on in my personal life while I was working as a parole officer back then. And what I actually noticed was when I first started working as a probation officer in London, when I first started working with really interesting, diverse clients, and from a place of wanting to help people, that's when I noticed a lot of things happening in my personal life too. So where I was attracting broken wings in my workspace, I was also doing that in my personal life too. So after the tail end of a few really, really hectic years, I went into depression in London, got myself out of it through numerous different awesome personal development tools, generally being in the sunshine, going on holiday, hanging out with awesome people, putting the broken pieces of myself back together again. And then later on that year, I moved here to Australia. And I moved to Sydney originally, and then I moved to Perth. And, moving country is hard. It'd been my dream for 10 years, but it's really difficult to set up your whole life in a completely different space where you've got no work history, I didn't have any bank accounts here or work history or rental history. And so just setting that stuff up was difficult. And I was miles away from like the other side of the world to anyone that had ever seen me in depression before, all my best mates. And it didn't take long of a few things not working out. My relationship was one of them at the time, where I found myself I was single. I'd kind of broken up from a guy I was on off with for like the next 8 years, who didn't treat me very well. And that was the tail end of a relationship that I'd come out of where that was really hectic. So I still hadn't really properly rebuilt myself at that stage. Had not succeeded necessarily at that time in getting sponsored to stay in the country. So I was having to plant trees for 3 months to do seasonal regional work to get my next working holiday visa. So I'm not in a relationship where I'm helping anyone. I'm ages away from all of my friends that know and love me, that I could potentially help over there too. And I wasn't doing a job where I was helping anyone. And I really quickly fell back into depression. And I realized one day while I was watering the seedlings that all my self-worth came from helping other people. And I realized how fucked that was. And I still did nothing about it at the time, except for I delved into self-care. And self-love is so much more than self-care. The self-care aspect is, doing those things that fill up your cup. So the simple things like good nutrition, good hydration, moving your body, sunshine, getting enough sleep, nice baths, all that kind of stuff. But that's just one tiny part of self-love. Self-love is being kind to yourself, speaking kindly to yourself, having boundaries, not people pleasing, like really tuning into whether something feels like a yes or a no for you. I was still really like years away from actually figuring that stuff out. So that was 2011. Fast forward to 2016 when I'd built my dream house by the ocean. I was back in this relationship with this guy. We'd been together for many years at that point. And I quit my job back then to do my business full time. And I just started, and I'd achieved, I think I'd got permanent residency at that point. So I kind of had ticked a lot of these boxes, and I just felt this growing hole in my solar plexus area, which is kind of around here. And on an energetic level, that's where your confidence and self-esteem is. And I just felt this growing, gaping hole. It was like I was really hungry, but not physically hungry. It was a really interesting feeling. And I knew what that meant, but I didn't understand why. I thought, why am I feeling this way? And I eventually figured it out. I was listening to a couple of podcasts, when you listen to podcasts and have those aha moments. Good. And I realized that I, even though I'd achieved all these things, I didn't feel like I deserved them. And that was like a massive wake up call for me. I thought, that's really interesting. And my relationship was really not good. I was really allowing myself to be treated not very nicely at all. And that was the one area of my life that I really didn't feel like I'd got right. And I felt like I'd figured out a lot of the rest of my life, and I just was not getting this part of my life right. And I realized that I'd never worked on the self-love aspect. It was the thing that I'd never actually looked at. And so I really delved deep from that point. So I put together this playlist at the time called Project Self-Worth. It's this free playlist in YouTube that I give out now. And I was just adding to this playlist for years. I still add to it now. There's like 185 videos on there or something. Most of it is EFT, which is tapping. So you tap on various acupressure points around the face and the body while you repeat statements that you believe to be true. And that really helps you process stuff and shed stuff. And then there were other things like yoga for opening up the heart chakra, and subliminal music and meditations, hypnotherapy, loads and loads of stuff in there. But all of it was focused on building my self-worth, self-love, self-esteem. And had a couple of other girlfriends back in London who were going through similar things that I shared it with them and we were all doing this playlist like nonstop all day long and noticing what was going on and how we felt. And the first thing that I noticed was that hole started closing up and I just felt happier. Nothing actually changed, but I felt happier with the situation. And then I felt it was quite subtle over time, but where I'd been really trying my hardest to set boundaries with my partner around money, around how he spoke to me, around how I allowed myself to be treated, I felt like it was always a massive effort to do that. So he would say something to me where generally he would speak to me like I was the shit on the bottom of his shoe. And normally what would happen is I'd feel that kick in the guts and then I'd just go off and do something like the laundry and think for ages about how I should stand up for myself and what would I say if I was going to do that. And I'd just think and think and think. And then the moment would just pass and I'd come out and he'd be in a different mood and I wouldn't want to rock the boat, just in that kind of phase of treading on eggshells. So I'm like, oh, he's happier now, so I just won't say anything. And that was generally how I lived in that relationship, where I just didn't stand up for myself. Anyone who knows me now, or even when I was in that relationship, but outside of that relationship, anyone who knew me would have totally thought that I would stand up for myself if someone spoke to me like shit. And I just didn't with him. And one of the things that I noticed where I really started to understand that Project Self-Worth was working was he said something to me, which was just a bog standard thing that he would normally say, speaking to me like shit. And I instantly said something back to him. And I can't remember what he said. I can't remember what I said back. I wasn't aggressive. I wasn't passive aggressive. I just literally spoke my mind and let him know that what he just said to me, I wouldn't tolerate that anymore. I wouldn't let him speak to me like that anymore. And I was literally so surprised at what came out of my mouth that I turned around like someone else had said it. Like, who said that? And that's when I realized this. Yeah, literally. And that's when I realized this shit was working.
Yeah.
And I realized that I was then and I just kind of observed what was going on and how I was behaving. And I noticed that I was able to set boundaries and tell him what was acceptable, what wasn't acceptable, how I wanted to be treated, how I didn't, without actually having to think about it and for it to be an effort. And ultimately that led to the very quick demise of our relationship, which is totally fine by me. I left him. It was a couple of years later still that I left him from when I started Project Self-Worth, but I built my self-worth and self-love and self-esteem during that relationship, during the last part of our relationship, to the point where ultimately, if you're in an unhealthy relationship that doesn't serve you, that's not right for you, you will go in two separate directions. And that's okay. And that's the way that it's supposed to be ultimately. And if you think about, I was saying this to a client yesterday who was getting really down on herself, and she's in that building, that foundational building stage of rebuilding herself now after coming out of the tail end of a pretty nasty relationship. And she's giving herself a lot of shit for it, which is not self-love. And I said to her, look, imagine where you're going to be this time next year, having broken free from that relationship and doing all this work on yourself versus where you would be this time next year if you'd stayed in that relationship.
Absolutely.
So you can totally build your self-love and self-worth while you're in it. And what it will probably mean is that you won't be in that relationship anymore after who knows how long. I mean, there's so many different elements that come into that. People have kids together, pets together, houses together.
Yes, of course.
They may not be financially independent. And so there's so many different things that come into it, but only good stuff will come from working on your self-worth. And I feel like this is something that everybody should work on.
Oh, definitely. Even since I've been working on mine from my own addiction recovery, it's connecting to my true self has been a complete game changer in how my life looks now. Like I would never, ever do the things that I used to do in the past that ended up being quite harmful for myself, but I wasn't I wasn't strong enough in recognizing who I was and what I deserved. And, I just didn't love myself. I really didn't. So I just let all this shit happen. And now I feel so cemented in. I'm like, don't you fucking even dare. Like, I will not take shit from anyone now. And it's so good. Naturally, when you get to that point though, like I lost so many friendships, like so many relationships were impacted. At first I was a little bit like, oh, this sucks. Like I feel really like alone. I just don't feel like I align with a lot of people because when you're not being true to yourself, the circles around you as well end up being people that are not really who you need to be around. And so when you step out of that and it all starts to shed away, it can be lonely. It can be really lonely. But as I pushed through that, then these doors started opening up. And then these really amazing people started coming through. That because I was attracting those people. I was on that same energy wavelength as them. And my God, I wouldn't ever go backwards now. Like it's just been bliss. And now I have a partner like who really cares about me, really respects me, who's willing to like communicate, work on our relationship. I mean, every relationship has their issues, but it's handled in such a healthy way now. It's like, all right, let's sit down and talk about it. We don't yell, we don't scream. It's just like, let's yarn this out. I want to figure out what's going on for you. I'll tell you how I'm feeling, and we will figure this out together. And it's just been incredible, so incredible.
That's awesome. And I don't think it's possible to attract relationships like that last from a place of a lack of self-love. Like you might attract relationships like that and you'll freak out because someone's treating you nicely and you won't believe that it's real. So you'll sabotage it or fuck it up in some way. Yeah. And like when I met Cam, we've been together for nearly 5 years now. He's just such an amazing human. We have the best relationship. And I met him on the back of doing this self-love work, and I'd still then had to keep doing more on myself and coach myself through the relationship because I wasn't used to being treated like that at all. And it was, it gave me kind of panicky butterflies when he would just do or say something nice because I'm like, fuck, I don't know if I can trust this because I haven't been able to trust my own judgment of people and trust myself and my own decision-making for 38 years at that point. I thought, I'm not just going to trust it now.
Yeah, of course. It's like, what's your game? What do I need to be on alert for?
Exactly.
Yeah,
waiting for the red flags. There's still no red flags.
Yeah, he's hiding behind the green flags. But no, that's amazing. And so that it's really good to hear that, that we can get to those places while being in an unhealthy relationship, that we can make that happen and just being prepared for it to potentially go its separate ways.
And that includes friendships, like you say, as well. And it can be a very lonely place if you suddenly realize that actually were your friendships proper friendships. Like if you're now coming from a place where you 100% love, honor, trust, and respect yourself and your decisions and how you feel, and you're really attuning into that and you're embodying it, then you can start to see the people in your innermost circle and your outer circle as well who don't align with that. And if nobody aligns with that version of you, that's a really lonely place to be in. And you have to rebuild from there and figure out who your new tribe are. But that in-between space is lonely and isolating, and you've just got to keep pushing forward, knowing that your right people are coming towards you.
It's changing, and it's just knowing that they're on their way. Like they are on their way, they just haven't arrived yet. But it was tough at that point of time. You do feel quite lonely, but I held on out, and thankfully, so many amazing people walked into my life soon after that. So,
it's so worth it. I think you just have to remember, you just got to remember it's worth it. It will definitely be worth it. Once you learn this stuff, there's no going back. Like, why would you go back to a place where you don't love yourself when you've actually realized that's the problem?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So stick with it.
Yeah. So why do people who know they deserve better still struggle to leave?
I would probably challenge that they maybe don't deep down know that they deserve better. So you might, there's thinking it consciously, and then there's the feeling of it very subconsciously. So it wasn't until I was 38 that I even knew what happened to me as a baby. And this was stuff that I'd never had a conversation with my mum about this. I didn't know that when, like, I'm the eldest of 3 kids, and my brother came 15 months later. And my mom was really struggling with postnatal depression. And she's from Holland. And my grandparents came over from Holland and took me to Holland for 3 months, 6 months, she doesn't even know. And she did that completely from a space of love. As an adult, you can look back on that and say, I was with people that love me. She did that out of love. That's like, I completely understand her decision. But I was 15 months old at the time. And you and I went to go and see Gabor Mace recently, where he talks about trauma and abandonment and all those things. And you think about what a 15-month-year-old brain, how a 15-month-old baby would take that, where you're ripped away from your primary caregiver who's essentially given you away and abandoned and rejected you. That's what you would think as a baby, or that's what you would feel, because you wouldn't necessarily have those thoughts. But when I hit 38 and I had these real core wounds of abandonment and rejection come up, I literally had to call my mum and say, you need to tell me what happened to me as a baby, because all my training in psychology and in my whole career, these wounds that I'm feeling, all I remember is being loved as a kid. So they just don't make sense to me. So can you please explain to me what early life was like? And that's when she told me that. And she'd kind of forgotten it. You know, it was a really rough time in her life. And I have no conscious memory of it whatsoever. So it's not something that consciously ever affected me. But I know as a baby, I would have made that mean something really bad about myself. And I asked her, you know, how was it when she got me back? She said, I knew it was the worst thing I ever did, because I got you back and you couldn't look at me for weeks. And then I put you down in your cot and you were just frozen. Your whole body was frozen. The only thing that moved around was your eyes. And I'm like, oh my fucking God. Now it made complete sense why I just went after guys who would abandon and reject me, even if they were physically with me. You know, they were emotionally unavailable. And I abandoned myself because of that. I abandoned myself to feel like someone was loving me. And so I stuck around in relationships where guys didn't really love me and they didn't show me their behavior in a loving way. So while consciously I knew that I deserved better, subconsciously all that programming was still driving me, right? So I felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like I wasn't wanted, unlovable. They'd reject me, they'd abandon me. And so it took a lot of work to figure that out in the first place, and then to have the courage to leave. Like, by then I was living in an unfinished house build, you know, looking around at all this stuff thinking, fuck, how am I going to do this on my own? And knowing that I could, knowing that I would be supported in some way by the universe if I made the right decision for myself. But still, I feel like a lot of people in this position, I've heard this a lot from people, from guys especially, actually, where they've said to me, I just wish I had the guts to cheat on them, which isn't a gutsy thing to do at all. But it's like people feel like they need a good, big, solid reason to leave someone. If it's just shit and it's been shit for a while and there's kids involved and property involved and all that stuff, then it's like you need some big, massive thing to happen for you to say, ha, that's why I'm out the door, because of that.
Yeah.
Not because I don't love you anymore and I love myself more than I love you.
Yeah, I mean, that's it though. But yeah, especially when it is layered like that and there is a lot of ties, it does make it really hard. So yeah, having that big reason to leave, I guess in your head you're kind of justifying it, and yeah, you're just not going with that confidence and that connection with your own heart and your self-worth that you should actually move on because you deserve better. It's just,
and it's also really hard to even know what to say. Like, how do you have these conversations? And I seem to have coached a lot of people in ending relationships. I've been blamed for a lot of relationship breakups, which I'm fine with, because if that's the right thing for them, then that's the right thing for them. But what I encourage people to do is just write, like, you know, you've got this jumbled up washing machine of thoughts going on in your head. Write it out on paper, not necessarily to give to that person, but just to get those thoughts out of your head. You know, people do journaling a lot these days. Get those thoughts out of your head. Really write how you're feeling, what you're thinking, why you're feeling it, why you're thinking it. And also, like, do what I call like a brain dump version, where you're getting all your angry thoughts and everything out on paper. And definitely don't use that one as the final draft. Remove any blame, remove anything that could inflame a conversation. If you were to take 100% full ownership of everything that's happening in the relationship when you have this conversation, you know, rather than saying you did this and you did that and you make me feel like this and that's why I'm leaving, just that's not going to be a conversation that goes well. So just accept responsibility in whatever way that you can. And often what I find is people realize once they've left that they actually fell out of love with that person many, many years ago. So using the reason of being in love with someone to stay is like an untruth.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just hard to make the decision. Even when you've made the decision, it's hard to have the conversation. It's hard to find the right time for a conversation like that. There's no right time for a conversation like that.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. It's always messy. It's always hard. It's never an easy situation or a smooth sailing situation. It's always going to be difficult. So how does self-love help override like fear, guilt, or that like emotional dependency?
Oh, I don't know if self-love necessarily overrides fear at all. I think that it definitely can put it on the back burner enough to make you trust yourself enough that you know that even if it's scary, you're going to do it anyway. Like the old quote says, feel the fear and do it anyway. You know that it's scary and you know that it needs to be done. So you just kind of forge ahead knowing that that's the right decision to make. I think when you trust yourself to that extent, you do the hard things. What's the other quote that says, choose your hard? It's hard to leave a relationship. It's also hard to be in a shit relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to be in fear. And it's also hard to not do the thing that you're in fear about and ultimately not live a better life because of doing the thing.
Yeah. And I wanted to actually ask you a little bit more about even trauma bonding. What role does trauma bonding play, and how can self-love help you break that cycle?
So a lot of people think that trauma bonding is about bonding over shared trauma, and it's not. So trauma bonding in relationships can happen in any relationship, whether it's intimate relationship or not. And trauma bonding is like this cycle of reward and punishment. So an abuser will abuse the person in whatever way they're doing it, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, degrading them in some way. And then they will kind of, the abused person will go into this cycle of, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I did something wrong, I'm bad, and they'll blame themselves as well as the abuser blaming them. And then, often at times when the person is talking about leaving or they go to stay with a family member or a friend or whatever, there'll be that kind of like a reward cycle where that abusive person almost turns back into the person that the abused person fell in love with. It's this really fucked up cycle where you'll have fallen in love with person A, and then person A becomes person B, and just there's this cycle of abuse that goes on. But person B can turn back into person A at whatever time they decide to do it, when they just hook you back in again, and I was discussing this with a client yesterday, they give you enough of a drip feed of the person that you fell in love with to make you stay. And they'll also kind of reward you, not with gifts or anything, but just like, I'm so sorry, I love you so much, I'll never do it again, all those kind of words, which is just meaningless words really, but they will tell you everything that you want to hear. They'll make you believe, or try and make you believe, that they are really, really sorry for what they've done, that they love you, that they'll never hurt you again, that they'll never leave you, XYZ. And so that kind of cycle just continues. So it's like, that cycle of reward and punishment is the trauma bonding cycle that keeps you stuck in that trauma bond. So you're bonded through the trauma that the abuser inflicts on you. It's kind of like terrorism in the home.
Yeah, I love the way that you actually explained that, because, a lot of people do seem to believe that it is bonding over some type of trauma. So I love the way that you explained that. That was really clear and easy to digest, actually. So thank you for that. So what are some daily practices that, could help strengthen that self-worth when either preparing to leave, or like if you started to consider it, or you just genuinely want to work on your self-worth?
So I won't say easy, but the easiest place to start is through compliments. When you receive compliments, this is a really good indication as to your level of self-love. What 95% of people do when they receive a compliment is say, oh, this whole thing, I just got it down the op shop, or oh, I've just washed it, or, they'll rebuff the compliment, or they'll give a compliment back because they struggle to accept the compliment. They struggle to hear any nice words towards them. So if you experience that when you receive a compliment, and which you don't really receive the compliment, then you just kind of, ignore it. If that's where you're at when you get compliments from people, then pay attention to that. So a really simple place to start is when someone gives you a compliment, just accept the compliment. Say, thanks. I like this top too. That's why I bought it.
I love that.
Without feeling the need to just kind of ignore it or rebuff it or give one back or whatever it might be. So the really simple practices that you can do each day are just really tuning into how you're feeling about whatever the situation is. So if someone invites you to do something tomorrow and you really don't like, your first thought is, oh, I don't really want to do that for whatever reason. If your instant response normally would be to make up an excuse or just say yes, even if you don't want to go, just pay attention to what you're actually feeling. Just tune into your body and say, does it feel like a yes or does it feel like a no? And if it feels like a no, know that you don't always have to answer people straight away, even if you're in person with them. Just say, oh, let me get back to you on that, while you try and figure out how you're going to respond to it. A really good way to respond is to say, that doesn't feel like a yes for me, because no one can actually argue with that if it doesn't feel like a yes for you. Whereas if you stop feeling the need to outright lie to people about why you can't do something, because that's not being honest. If it doesn't feel like a yes for you, that's being honest. And if you're fearful of the repercussions around that, then think about why. Really reflect on why you feel like you can't say no to that person. Is it because of your relationship with them, where it's an unhealthy one? Is it because of your own stuff, where you really need to work on just getting used to saying no? So just really paying attention to what you're thinking, how you're feeling, what feels true for you. And there will also be a lot of people who don't know the answers to that, because their confidence is so eroded that they just won't even know the answers to questions. They won't know how to tune into how they're feeling and what they're thinking. But if you can actually do this in a really simple way. If you kind of just close your eyes down and think, okay, my name is, and then give yourself a completely different name. Feel into what that feels like when it's a no, because that's not true. And then feel into what it feels like when you say my name is, and that's your actual name. Feel what actually happens in your body when you say something that's a lie versus something that's the truth. And start becoming a bit more mindful about, how you're feeling in any given moment. Just really start tuning into that, and do that every day, all day long, just in those little moments, which can be difficult if you're rushing around all the time and you're not paying attention and you're just living life in survival mode, right? But try and take those snippets of time in your day where you can actually sit there and go, what am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling that? And not necessarily even really analyzing it, but just kind of, what am I feeling right now? Where am I feeling it in my body? And then just practicing, it's a learned skill. Setting a boundary when you've never done it before is a learned skill. You don't get in a car for the first time and expect to be able to drive it. Think about when you first got in a car to learn how to drive, how overwhelming everything was, how many different things there are to do when you're driving a car, versus when you're an experienced driver, you can drive down the road and you won't even remember how you got there because you just don't think about it. It's automatic. And that's what any learned skill is like. It takes practice, it takes dedication, it takes fucking up sometimes, making those mistakes, and just saying, okay, I'm just going to try again next time. So yeah, I would say compliments and setting boundaries, just saying no when you want to say no instead of saying yes automatically, giving yourself that time and the space.
I loved the way that you explained that. That was beautifully said. And because that little voice as well that we hear within ourselves, someone once described it to me as, because it's our intuition, that's our, how we can connect with ourselves, is that little quiet voice that we hear. So it's ignore the big loud voice, which might be the ego coming in. But it's listen to the little quiet voice. But I loved how you were saying, think about, the truths and the lie and going about it that way. I was just sitting here I didn't even think about that. That's actually a really good way to indicate how you're truly feeling and how that does show up in your body. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was actually really, really helpful, even for me.
No worries. And, going back to what you said about when things feel wrong, pay attention to that.
Yeah.
If it feels wrong, then it's wrong for you. even if it's right for someone else. Just, you don't always have to go with what someone else wants all the time. And that's another simple thing to do. You know, if you're going to a restaurant or going to a cafe or going wherever, and you normally just let someone else pick where you're going because it's easier, and you feel like you don't have decision-making powers or whatever, then start stepping up and say, actually, you know what? I don't want to go there. Let's go here instead.
Yeah.
And just start using the non-emotive stuff first, like, because it's easier to kind of build your decision-making powers and your trust in yourself from the more non-emotive aspects, you know, like the compliments and like invitations to parties that you don't want to go to and stuff like that. I actually, in my last job, I made a few of my workmates laugh. One of them was trying to organise like a catch up for everyone down at the beach on a Sunday. It's going to be 25% of the weekend would have been gone on this, right? With hanging out with colleagues, talking about work, because, you know, all you do when you get together is talk about work.
That's what you've got in common,
I mean, our work was pretty interesting, to be fair, but you would just talk about work, and you'd be there with their kids as well. And they said, "Oh, are you coming on Sunday?" I'm like, "Fuck no." And it just comes out of my mouth really easy. And they're like, "What?" I'm like, I hang out with you guys all week. Like, I'm not giving away 25% of my weekend to hang out with you some more, talk about work some more, and hang out with your kids as well.
Like, that's the biggest no of them all.
And the thing about setting boundaries is that when, you know, in the early days, when you first start setting boundaries, people are going to think that you're a bitch or a wanker.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, if you've never ever done it before, that's how people will view you. But people who meet me now, like, they're not surprised at all that I say fuck no so easily if I don't want to do something. Like, because that's just Carly, right? That's just who I am. I don't do things if I don't want to do them.
Yeah, and they understand that boundary now, because you've really set that. It's really firm, and so people know, and they won't question it.
Yeah, and now I just wear a t-shirt. I'm like, it just points that. Like,
read the shirt. That's so funny. And there's even sometimes though when, like, particularly when it comes to events and things like that, where I used to always say yes. I always struggled to say no. Sometimes I do still struggle to say no sometimes, and it feels off, but I don't know why. So then I spend a moment being like, like, this doesn't feel good for me. I'm not sure why it's a no, but because of just how I'm feeling, I'm going to make it a no, even though I don't really know why. It's obviously not sitting right.
Yeah, and it's okay not to know why. And sometimes it's not even about that person or that event that you don't want to go to. It's more about, oh, you know what? I've hung out with people all week long, and I'm really missing some time by myself. I'm really missing just doing nothing at home with my dog, laying in the garden in the sunshine, going for a sauna. Like, it's more important for me in that moment to have time on my own, even though going to that thing sounds really cool. I know that I'd much rather not do that. So
and that's actually probably been a very common occurrence for me, is I've just might have had a very busy work schedule, or, you know, I've worked 1 week 7 days, which I don't recommend. And I've just, you know,
I did that for years and years, 7-day weeks. Yeah, it sucks.
I'm trying to get in the habit of stopping that, because it got a little bit out of hand last year. But yeah, there was just events coming up, and I'd be like, I love you guys and I want to see you, but like, my battery is so low, I just can't say yes to this. Like, I actually really need time to myself. So yeah, that was something that came up for me. All right, listen up, legends. If you're looking to experience the real Western Australia, there's no better way than with Why Not Bus, who is one of our sponsors. I've actually been on their tour, and let me tell you, it is awesome vibes, epic adventures, and I made lifelong friends. We're talking snorkeling with sea lions, manta rays, whale sharks, camping under the stars, and taking your time to enjoy the beauty of WA. Use my discount code PARIS2025 and get $300 off your next tour. Go to www.whynotbus.com.au. What I was next going to ask you is, how can someone rebuild their identity? Because you do lose yourself when you're, well, if you're not connected to yourself, how can you lose yourself? But, you know, how do you rebuild your identity and confidence after an unhealthy relationship?
A really common thing is people feeling like a shell of themselves when they come out of a relationship like that. And I felt that many times at the end of a relationship, and even during a relationship, right? Which is another reason why it's so hard to leave, when you are just you're like a shell of yourself and there's just nothing there. There's no energy there. There's no motivation there. There's no passion there. But when you're finally free from that relationship, and I really, really recommend cutting ties completely if that's possible. Sometimes it's not if there's kids and stuff involved, but do what you can to just cut the cord and stop microdosing on your ex, because that's the thing that will keep draining you as well. You won't be able to rebuild from that place where you're still in touch with that person that has been the person that's made you a shell of yourself. So start doing things that fill up your cup. In the early stages where you're feeling really burnt out and you've been in survival mode for a really long time, it's literally the really simple things. Chop wood, fetch water. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. Like, sleep is probably the number one priority, because when you're not sleeping properly, everything else goes to shit. And I work with a lot of women, especially who they've been in survival mode for so long in these unhealthy, abusive relationships that they come out of it and they never had sleep problems before, but all of a sudden they do now. And they're like, why? They're literally coming out of that trauma bond cycle. They're coming out of that survival mode cycle where their adrenals are flogged out, burnt out. Their physical body and their physiology has changed as a result of being in survival mode for such a long time that you literally just don't try and chuck too many things at it. Don't expect that you can do all these personal development things. Like, it's a nice idea to imagine journaling every day, meditating every day, doing all these different things every day. But if that's not where you are right now, just give yourself some grace and give yourself the time and the space to just rebuild your energy firstly. So getting enough sleep, getting outside in the sunshine, even if it's a cloudy day, just kind of trying to get that vitamin D into your skin, into your body, which also helps with your sleep. Staying hydrated, eating the right foods, hanging out with the right people. And if there's no right people in your life, then spending a lot of time on your own while you're rebuilding your energy. Because if you're in that space, you're in a really vulnerable space for more energy vampires to latch onto your energy field and suck the living daylights out of you. So you have to kind of rebuild who you are, as if you're building a house, right? Like, for a house to actually stay upright, you need that real solid concrete foundation. You're not going to build a house on sand. So you've got to imagine just laying that concrete slab for yourself. And what does that mean for you? It's about really focusing on the really, really simple details, getting a really good, solid routine, morning routine and sleep routine in place for yourself. And once you start feeling that energy shift and like you can kind of get it back out there in the world again, just start lapping up information through podcasts, through books, through just really start following people who are who've come from where you've been and who now are where you want to be. Whatever that means for you in your life right now, just absorb and lap up. There's some amazing people online. We have this whole world at our fingertips, which is incredible and overwhelming at times. But if you just focus on following the people who are where you want to be and look at what they did to get there, like that's what anyone does when they want to learn something, right? You learn from people that have done the same thing as you. And also declutter your news feed, all your social media from any negativity. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to start blocking people like there's no tomorrow, although some people probably deserve that. But just start unfollowing stuff that people are posting. If you know, like I went through a big phase of this where I don't actually hang out in the newsfeed very much at all. But if I'm in the newsfeed and then I see something just really shit and negative pop up, then I'll just unfollow it, unfriend, unsubscribe, whatever, so that I don't have that negativity infiltrating my brain, especially when I'm feeling vulnerable, tired, whatever it might be. So surround yourself with as much positivity as possible and just start rebuilding your energy gradually that way. When I was first depressed in London in 2010, my brother saw that I was in a really dark place and he said to me, you need to go on holiday. But I was getting ready to move to Australia. And so I wasn't willing to spend any of my savings on going on a holiday before I moved to a completely different country. And he was so generous at the time. He's like, just decide where you want to go and I'll get you there. So I went on I can't remember what you call it now, like an all expenses paid thing to Turkey at the time. So it's like, your hotel, all your food and everything was included. So I just literally had to turn up and I was shitting myself. I was depressed and I was on my own. I just went traveling on my own. And the whole goal for that week that I was there was to get as much sleep as my body needed, stay as hydrated as I could, and just lay in the sunshine. And I listened to flat out, I listened when you still had the little iPods. I had one of those and I flat out listened to Louise L. Hay affirmations just the whole holiday, just laying in the sunshine, just drinking water, sleeping, resting as much as I needed to, totally on my own by the pool. And every day I felt a little bit better. And my gauge during that holiday was whether I could read a book or not, because during depression, I felt like my brain melted and I could not even read one sentence, let alone absorb anything on the pages. And I love reading. So I took a couple of books with me, and every day I'd check in with the book to see if I could actually read a sentence at that point. And so that's literally all I did for that week. And towards the end of the trip, these young girls that were there on like a girls' trip kind of started talking to me by the pool one day. And I'm like, are you here on your own? Because I noticed that I wasn't with anyone all week. I said, yeah. They said, come and hang out with us. And then before I know it, I'm hanging out with them and we're having cocktails and we're partying in one of the hotel rooms. And I came back from that holiday feeling amazing.
Oh,
but it was
so
the
good.
really, really simple things. Like I was living in a flat in Southeast London, not getting out for walks in the sunshine. I was just like holed up in the dark every day. And my brother saw that. He recognized that. And he's like, you need some sunshine. I'm like, yes, I know, but I don't want to spend any money. So that was the whole goal. Just lay in the sunshine, absorb it all, just get all the good stuff in. It was simple stuff, and the simple stuff works. And once you've got the simple stuff nailed, then start with the personal development stuff. Look at forgiveness work. Self-forgiveness is the big key here. Do things like EFT tapping. If you want my Project Self-Worth playlist, let me know. I'll send it to you, because I created that one for myself, and now I just give it away to everyone because it was the key to me rebuilding myself. And then you'll start attracting the right people into your life who will actually make comments about how awesome you are, and you'll start believing it. And then you'll just gradually kind of rebuild day by day. It can be a slow process, but as long as you're going in the right direction, it's a very, very worthwhile cause. And if you do that for yourself, imagine what your life could be like this time next year.
Oh, absolutely. And I love that you really explained that it is the simple things. And I do have that playlist as well. We do have it on the website, but I will link it in the description as well so people can just quickly navigate to it, because it is a good one. I have tried it. It is amazing. It is so, so good. So I wanted to actually touch on something that you briefly mentioned as well about self-forgiveness. So how do you balance self-forgiveness and accountability for enabling toxic dynamics? It's a bit of a doozy.
Juicy question, Paris. Look, I think, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because self-forgiveness is probably the most important kind of forgiveness that you can do, and the hardest one to do, because people are giving themselves so much shit for what they've allowed into their lives and the things that they've done as a result of that. But you can't, I feel like you can only propel yourself so far forward if you're just focusing on forgiving other people and not yourself. But that doesn't mean that when you forgive yourself for the things that you've allowed into your life, that you're not taking accountability and responsibility for where you've got yourself to. So it is about, like, I don't blame the people that have used and abused me in the past for what they did. I accept responsibility for the fact that I let them do that to me. Users and abusers will use and abuse anyone and everything, whoever they can get their hands on. But it's our responsibility to not allow that behavior to continue. For whatever reason you allowed that to continue, generally for a lack of self-love. Once you figure that out, it's 100% your responsibility to do the work on that. And self-forgiveness is one of those things. And it's also about recognizing and taking, like you said, taking accountability for the fact that you have completely enabled their behavior. Once you realize what's going on, and, what's the saying? Fool me once, it's your fault. Fool me twice, it's my fault. However the saying goes, if you keep allowing...
Yep.
Yeah, that's it. Shame on you, shame on me. If you keep letting that happen in your life, then that's your responsibility. Take ownership of it. And I don't mean blame yourself for it. I mean, take responsibility for it. They're two very different things. Blame will put you into a shame spiral and you can't move forward from there. It's a really toxic kind of energy.
Yeah.
But taking responsibility for everything that shows up in your life because it's in your life is really where the power is. And there's a really great book by Jocko Willink, who I think is an ex-US Navy SEAL. He's got a really great book called Extreme Ownership. I was going to completely forget it then. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. It's a weird spelling his name. Jocko Willink, Inck, I think it is. I'm sure you can put it in the show notes.
We'll double check it.
Yeah. But that's a really, really great book. And he gives so many amazing leadership examples of where he's taken full responsibility for things. And that also role models to other people. When you take full responsibility and stop with the blame game and stop saying, you made me feel this way, you made me do this. No one can make you feel or do anything at the end of the day. They can coercively control you into doing stuff, but you still did it. And so it's really about just taking responsibility for your actions, which is extremely confronting and very empowering if you kind of flip it. If you flip the script to it being empowering and not, really confronting, then you can use that to drive you forward. If it's true that everything is 100% your responsibility, that also means it's completely within your control to change everything in your life if you so choose to.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So we've talked quite a bit about unhealthy relationships. But what are some healthy relationship green flags that indicate self-worth is being respected? What should we be looking for?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's about respecting people's boundaries, even if they don't necessarily agree with them or if it hurts them in some way. So if you set a boundary and that person completely just shits all over it, that's an unhealthy trait. If they say, okay, no, that might hurt them, but they respect you for it and they respect you for sticking up for yourself and setting a boundary in the first place, then that's a green flag. They speak to you with kindness, even if they're tired, even if they're feeling shitty, even if you're in the middle of some kind of debate or conflict. It's about doing those things like when you were talking earlier about the way that you and your partner handle issues now. You sit down and have a yarn.
Yeah.
Even when it's uncomfortable, you sit down and have a chat about how things are going, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't want to. And it's about just having that kind of healthy level of self-love for yourselves and each other, so you can have that personal space and boundaries and have your own time as well as time together. It's if you've got people of the opposite sex on your friends list, they wouldn't have an issue with it. They wouldn't have those kind of trust issues because they're a stable, solid person where they're going to make you go through your friends list on Facebook and delete anyone of the opposite sex or anyone that you've had some kind of intimate moment with in the past. So it's very stable, it's very loving, it's very kind, it's supportive. They'll be your biggest cheerleader when things are going well, and they'll be that person that you want to call when things aren't going so well.
Yeah, you've literally just described my partner. Chick, healthy relationship. Excellent.
Cute.
He's a good egg. He's such a good egg. So how can someone continue cultivating self-love while in a healthy relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to just keep doing it, right? Because I feel like if there's anything that's not going right in your life, whether it's staying in a job that you don't like anymore or still hanging out and being friends with people that are just draining you every time you see them, there's clues as to where you may not be loving yourself in your life, whether you're in a healthy relationship or not. So I feel like it's always about just continually tuning into how you're feeling about everything and listening to that. And I think it becomes much more of an automatic process, like driving a car down the road without knowing it now. Not without knowing it, but you know what I mean, in a very automatic way. And it's just about, they become daily habits and daily practices, just like having a shower and washing your teeth, washing your hair, brushing your teeth.
We got you.
Yeah, it just becomes an automatic thing for you to go, oh, that doesn't feel right. And listening to it, going, okay, what do I need to know about that? And really just tuning into yourself. So that's how you just keep going with the self-love and just dealing with stuff as it arises rather than letting it build up over time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, I want to ask more about what your coaching programs, services, what you've got going on at the moment. Tell us a little bit about that. And if you're happy to talk about like the costs involved as well, like let us know. Share away.
Awesome. So I literally tomorrow at the time of recording, so tomorrow is Valentine's Day at the time of recording, and I'm launching my brand new 3-month coaching container called Project Self-Worth, which is literally all about everything that we've been talking about. It's for ladies only. I might consider doing a male version in the future if there's enough interest, but I really wanted this to be a very safe space for women only to be able to share, because a lot of women have had a lot of trauma from men. So this is for any of my ladies out there who are, it doesn't matter if you're single or in a relationship right now, but whether you're single or in a relationship, you've had a history of unhealthy, abusive, toxic relationships full of red flags that you've completely ignored, and you don't know why you keep repeating this pattern. So this is the program that I wish I had. Like with anything people generally create, I wish that I had this back in my 20s. You know, I went from 17 to 38 having 4 really serious long-term shit relationships because I didn't love myself enough. So I've created this whole program for people who are in that same boat. It doesn't matter if you're being physically abused. It matters if you don't feel good in your relationship for some reason. So a lot of people will think that abuse is just physical abuse being hit. It's not. It's so much more than that, which is why I talk about it as unhealthy relationships rather than abusive relationships. Ultimately, it's the same thing, really. So this is for any woman out there who's experiencing those things, who wants to figure out why they keep attracting these kind of relationships into their life, and they want to know how to break free, how to build their confidence and self-esteem to a point where they never let anyone treat them that. Oh my God, I'm fumbling with words now. Where they never let anyone treat them like shit again.
Yeah.
And I'm really kind of breaking that cycle by knowing where it comes from, knowing what needs to be healed, and then also looking at how, like, what does your ideal relationship even look like? Because people don't even know. They know what they don't want, and they focus on that a lot, which makes them keep attracting it. So really, really nutting out, what does a healthy relationship look like in general? And then what does a healthy relationship look like for you? What's your ideal kind of relationship? And then how to go about attracting that, but also holding on to it, because that's a whole different ball game as well. So this is going to be a really, really deep dive into all things relationships and self-love over a 3-month period. This is a lifetime course. So once you join, you're a member for life. I'll run a live round of it every year, meaning there'll be live group coaching calls every single week for a 12-week period. And there's also packages available where if people wanted to add on one-to-one coaching and one-to-one energy work, then they can do that as well. So tomorrow on Valentine's Day, I don't know when you're releasing this, by the way, but for Valentine's Day, there's going to be a 50% discount, and then there'll be an early bird special, and then there'll be the full price. So the full price for the basic package with no one-on-one coaching is 1197, and then depending if you wanted the silver package or the gold package, they're extra as well. So I'll be releasing that. This month it's kind of in the process of being released, and I also have another program that comes out in June called From Surviving to Thriving. So that's for men and women, and that's for people who are feeling lost, stuck, isolated, depressed, helpless, hopeless, have a history of stuff that they haven't really dealt with, and just want a supportive community of people to kind of work through that with as well. And yeah, that will come out every June as a live round. But again, that's an evergreen course that you can join anytime as well.
Thank you so much. It all sounds so good. This will actually get released probably 3 weeks from now. So will you still be running these promotions?
I will still be running it. Yes, I won't be running the discounted offers, but they can still sign up, and they won't be too late to join the live round either. So the live calls are going to start on the 26th of February, and they'll be 6 p.m. every Wednesday for the next 12 weeks after that.
Awesome. And what's the best way for them to sign up for this? Do you have a website? What's the best way?
Yes, so they can find me at coachcarly.com. On Facebook, I'm Coach Carly. Instagram, I'm Coach Carly Evans. So drop me a message. You can email me at carly@coachcarly.com. Just find me on the various platforms, and let's have a chat about where you're at. We can book in for a free call to just find out where you're at right now, what your current situation is. I do one-on-one coaching and stuff as well. So if you let me know a bit more about you and what your current situation is, then I can share some insight as to what might be able to help you. And I do this globally as well. So I do stuff in person in Perth or online as well. So
perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much. And we will put links to all of this in the description as well. Plus, Carly does have a profile on our website. If you go to shtsfckedpodcast.com, you'll be able to find all the links to her website and socials on there as well. So to wrap it up, if someone is struggling to leave an unhealthy relationship, what would you say to them about the role of self-love in finding the strength to walk away?
It's everything. I would say it's probably the only thing that you should be working on. If there's only one thing, work on that, because it will give you the strength to leave. It will really help you figure out who you are, what your needs are, what your motivations are, and it will help kind of really get you seeing what you've put up with in the past and in the present, and how you don't want that for yourself anymore.
Thank you so much for coming back on. It was so good chatting with you today. And yeah, I'm sure I'll be in touch with you soon. I'm keen to see a little bit more about these new programs. We'll definitely be advertising these for sure.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paris. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Have a good one. See ya.
You too. Bye.
Bye.